You're standing waist deep in a river, cold water pulling at your legs. Your whole neighborhood is watching from the bank. Right now, back in 2026, a cheater just gets a red flag emoji and a group chat roast. Back then, the river decided if you lived. So what actually happened next? And why did an entire civilization trust a river to know the truth? Because this wasn't superstition for its own sake. It was a legal system. And it reveals something wild about how deep our need to catch cheaters really goes. Start in Babylon, around 1754 BC. King Hammurabi carves 282 laws into a black stone pillar, nearly 8 feet tall. Today it sits in the Louvre. Historians call it the Code of Hammurabi, and it's one of the oldest detailed legal texts we have. A huge chunk of it deals with exactly one problem: people breaking trust, cheating spouses, false accusations, broken deals. Here's the thing: Hammurabi's court didn't always have DNA tests or security footage. Sometimes there were just 2 people, a rumor, and no witnesses. So the code built in something stranger. Law 132 says if a wife is accused of adultery but not caught in the act, she has to jump into the river. If she sinks, she's guilty. If she survives, she's innocent. The river was the judge. You'd assume this was random. Chaos dressed up as justice. That's the myth. Turns out, it wasn't chaos at all. Look closer, and there's a pattern. Accusers had skin in the game, too. Under the same code, if a man accused someone and couldn't prove it, and that person survived the ordeal, the accuser could be executed. False accusations weren't free. That detail rarely makes it into the pop history version, but it's sitting right there in the text. This wasn't just punishing cheaters. It was punishing liars about cheating, too. Now here's where it gets stranger. A few centuries later, in Assyria, the punishments get disturbingly specific. The Middle Assyrian laws, dated to roughly the 14th to 11th century BC, hand the husband direct control over his wife's fate if she's caught. He could have her executed. Or, under Law 15, he could cut off her nose instead, and if he chose that option, her lover was castrated and mutilated too. Matched punishment. Like the crime itself required symmetry. Quick gut check before we go further. If cheating were just a private heartbreak, why did entire governments write laws about noses? Because it was never just personal. Infidelity threatened inheritance, land, alliances, entire family lines. A society without reliable paternity couldn't reliably pass down property. So punishment wasn't about jealousy. It was about protecting the whole economic structure underneath the marriage. Let's talk about how far this pattern spreads. In ancient Egypt, legal texts describe rhinotomy, nose amputation used for adultery under later dynasties, echoing the same Near Eastern playbook. Historians studying Egypt's New Kingdom period have even proposed the Egyptians may have picked up the practice from contact with Assyria. Same punishment, crossing borders, like the idea itself was contagious. But the accusation side stayed just as brutal as the punishment side. Middle Assyrian Law 17 states that if a man claims another man's wife is promiscuous and can't produce witnesses, both men go to the river ordeal together. Same trial. Same drowning risk. The accuser wasn't safe just for talking. In other words, ancient courts weren't obsessed with catching cheaters. They were obsessed with catching liars about cheaters. Just as hard. Now here's the part that actually explains all of it. Evolutionary anthropologists studying kinship and paternity certainty argue that early legal systems weren't primarily moral projects. They were information problems. Before genetic testing, a community had almost no reliable way to confirm paternity. So they built brutal, public, expensive punishments instead. Cheating had to cost more than it paid, or the whole social contract around marriage and inheritance would collapse. The theory researchers point to is called costly signaling, punishment so severe and so visible that it functioned as proof the system couldn't be gamed. That's the mechanism. Fear wasn't a side effect. Fear was the technology. And it explains something that should feel uncomfortably familiar. You still live inside a version of this system. You just don't call it a river ordeal. You call it a paternity test kit from the pharmacy. A phone left face down on the table. A friend quietly checking someone's location on Find My iPhone. Different tools. Same ancient itch, the need to know, for certain, if you've been cheated. Back in Babylon, standing in that river, the water didn't actually know anything. But the fear of it did the job anyway. And maybe that's the real discovery here. Humans didn't need a perfect lie detector. They just needed one terrifying enough that most people never tested it. So next time you side-eye a read receipt, remember, someone once solved that exact problem with a river. If you had to guess, drop below, ordeal or algorithm, which one actually catches more liars? The river never lied. People did.